As the day quietly fades and stars begin to whisper above, welcome to Korean History Whispers. Tonight, we gently explore the heart and mind of Yun Gwan, the brilliant strategist whose greatest triumph became his deepest tragedy. While his conquests are recorded in history, tonight you will walk beside him through the choices that elevated him to glory, in the sophisticated corridors of Goryeo's royal court during the late 11th century, where literary accomplishment mattered as much as noble blood. A man named Yun Gwan was quietly building a reputation that would eventually reshape the kingdom's destiny. Born into the distinguished Byeolmuban clan, he inherited both the burden and privilege of a family whose loyalty to the crown stretched back to the very founding of the dynasty. His great-great-grandfather, Yun Sindulil, had earned recognition as one of the 3 Han merit subjects, who aided King Tajo in establishing Goryeo's dominance over the peninsula. His father, Yun Gwan, had served with distinction as assistant director of the Palace Supply Bureau, maintaining the family's tradition of faithful service to the royal household. This was not mere ceremonial nobility but a lineage built on practical contribution to the kingdom's governance and prosperity. The family's commitment to scholarly excellence became evident in Yun Gwan's marriage to a daughter of Yun Gwan from the prestigious Gyeongwon clan. This alliance linked to families renowned for their intellectual achievements while producing 7 sons and 2 daughters who would continue their father's tradition of distinguished service. Among these children, Yun Nui would earn his own place in the historical record, demonstrating that excellence was not merely inherited but cultivated through generations of dedicated effort. Yun Gwan's entry into government service came through the traditional path of scholarly achievement. In the 10th month of 1073, during the 27th year of King Munjung's reign, he successfully passed the civil service examinations that served as the gateway to official position. This accomplishment, while significant for any young scholar, represented more than personal advancement. It marked the beginning of a career that would span multiple reigns and fundamentally influence the kingdom's military and diplomatic policies. His earliest confirmed positions included service as remedy official and supplementary official, both roles within the Secretariat, Chancellery, that required him to monitor government policies and offer corrections when necessary. These were not merely clerical positions, but offices that demanded both moral courage and political sophistication, as officials were expected to challenge improper policies regardless of their source or popularity. During the reign of King Seonjung, Yun Gwan's responsibilities expanded to include service as palace attendant with oversight responsibilities for Gwangju, Cheongju, and Xianju provinces as inspector. This role provided crucial experience in regional administration while demonstrating the court's confidence in his judgment and integrity. The position required him to investigate local conditions, evaluate the performance of provincial officials, and report directly to the throne on matters affecting the kingdom's stability and prosperity. However, it was during King Seokjung's reign that Yun Gwan's political influence reached its full potential. His appointment as envoy to announce Seokjung's accession to both the Khitan Liao dynasty and Song China revealed the court's assessment of his diplomatic capabilities. These missions were far from routine ceremonial duties. They required delicate navigation of complex international relationships, while representing a king whose legitimacy might be questioned by foreign powers. Seokjung's ascension to the throne had been controversial, involving his assumption of power from his young nephew King Hyeonjong, in circumstances that could be interpreted as usurpation. The international implications were significant, as both Liao and Song needed to recognize the new king's legitimacy for Goryeo to maintain its position in East Asian diplomatic networks. The selection of Yun Gwan for these crucial missions indicated that the court viewed him as someone capable of explaining sensitive political situations while projecting the kingdom's strength and stability. His appointment as tutorial scholar for the Crown Prince during this period highlighted another dimension of his capabilities. Sukjong entrusted him with the intellectual development of the heir apparent, a responsibility that reflected both scholarly expertise and personal trustworthiness. The Crown Prince's tutorial office included both established figures who had supported Sukjong's rise and promising younger officials being prepared for future leadership roles, creating an environment where political loyalty and intellectual excellence intersected. The trajectory of Yun Gwan's career during these years demonstrated the kingdom's recognition of his multifaceted abilities. In 1101, he was appointed as Secretary of the Royal Secretariat, followed by promotion to Vice Director, and then to Personnel Minister concurrent with Royal Secretariat Director. These positions placed him at the very center of royal power, responsible for managing communications between the throne and various government agencies, while overseeing the personnel decisions that determine the kingdom's administrative effectiveness. His concurrent appointment as Inspector General in 1102 added oversight responsibilities that required him to monitor the performance of officials throughout the government hierarchy. This combination of roles, personnel management, royal communications, and administrative oversight, created unprecedented influence over the kingdom's daily operations, while ensuring that the king remained informed about all significant developments. Perhaps most significantly, Yun Gwan's appointment as examination supervisor in the same year gave him direct influence over the recruitment of new officials. In Goryeo's merit-based system, the relationship between examination supervisors and successful candidates created networks of loyalty and obligation that could last entire careers. Through this role, Yun Gwan was not merely implementing current policies, but shaping the future leadership of the kingdom, according to his judgment of talent and character. The scope of his political influence became evident through his involvement into major policy initiatives that would define Sukjong's reign. Currency reform and the reconstruction of Namgyal. Both projects reflected the king's ambitious vision for strengthening royal authority while enhancing the kingdom's economic and strategic capabilities. Goryeo's experience with metallic currency had been problematic since its introduction during King Seonjong's reign. The iron coins known as Jeowonjungbo had failed to gain widespread acceptance, with merchants and common people preferring traditional barter systems or cloth currency. During King Mokjung's reign, public resistance had forced the government to allow alternative payment methods, effectively abandoning monetary centralization. Sukjong's renewed push for currency adoption represented more than economic policy. It was an assertion of royal authority over commercial relationships throughout the kingdom. The establishment of specialized offices for coin production in 1097, followed by the creation of the Coin Production Bureau in 1101, demonstrated systematic commitment to this transformation. The massive production of Hedong Tungbo coins in 1102, distributed initially to government officials, marked the beginning of an ambitious attempt to revolutionize the kingdom's economic foundations. Yun Gwan's support for this currency policy reflected his understanding of its political implications. Successful monetary centralization would strengthen royal control over economic activity while providing new sources of revenue for government operations. His advocacy helped legitimize what might otherwise have appeared as an impractical scholarly experiment, lending his reputation for sound judgment to a controversial policy initiative. The Namgyal reconstruction project revealed another dimension of Yun Gwan's political involvement. The southern capital had originally been established during King Menjung's reign based on geomantic theories about enhancing national fortune, only to be abandoned when the expected benefits failed to materialize. The proposal by court official Kim Weij to re-establish this secondary capital reflected continuing belief in the strategic value of geographic diversification. Yun Gwan's assignment to survey potential palace sites alongside Choi Sachu and Imui demonstrated the king's confidence in his practical judgment regarding major construction projects. The successful completion of this survey, leading to Sukjong's approval for construction that was finished in 1104, represented another example of effective collaboration between royal vision and administrative expertise. These policy involvements revealed Yun Gwan as more than a skilled bureaucrat. He was emerging as a key architect of Sukjung's programs for strengthening royal authority. His willingness to support ambitious and sometimes controversial initiatives demonstrated both political courage and strategic thinking that would soon be tested in far more dangerous circumstances. The convergence of his scholarly background, administrative experience, and political judgment was creating a reputation that would make him the obvious choice when the kingdom faced its greatest external challenge. The Jurchen tribes of the northeast were beginning to coalesce under dynamic leadership, threatening the delicate balance of power that had maintained peace in East Asia for generations. As Yun Gwan consolidated his position as one of the kingdom's most trusted officials, he could hardly have imagined that his greatest opportunity for glory would simultaneously become the source of his ultimate downfall. The skills that had brought him to prominence, strategic thinking, organizational ability, and willingness to embrace bold solutions, would soon be tested against enemies who possessed advantages he had not yet learned to appreciate. As the day quietly fades and stars begin to whisper above. Welcome back to Korean History Whispers. Tonight, we witness Yun Gwan as he navigates the shifting currents of power in East Asia. While his strategic brilliance is documented in history, tonight you will feel the weight of decisions that would reshape a kingdom's destiny. The early years of the 12th century brought profound changes to the delicate balance of power that had maintained relative stability across East Asia for nearly a century. The triangular relationship between Song China, the Khitan Liao dynasty, and Goryeo Korea had created a system where military tensions were balanced by diplomatic necessity and economic interdependence. Yet beneath this surface gold toss, new forces were stirring that would soon shatter the established order and test every assumption about regional security. For over a century, the Jurchen tribes scattered across Manchuria and the northern reaches of the Korean peninsula had existed as fragmented communities, some paying tribute to Liao, others acknowledging Goryeo's authority, many simply trying to survive through subsistence agriculture, hunting, and small-scale raiding. These were not the unified force that would soon terrorize East Asia, but a collection of kinship groups whose political loyalties shifted according to immediate practical needs, rather than grand strategic visions. The transformation began with the rise of the Wanyan clan, centered in the Harbin region, under the leadership of capable chiefs who understood that tribal fragmentation made all Jurchen communities vulnerable to exploitation by more powerful neighbors. The excessive tribute demands imposed by Liao officials, combined with the natural ambitions of successful war leaders, created conditions where unification became both necessary and possible. Yenga and Weishu, the Wanyan chiefs who began this process of consolidation, possessed the rare combination of military skill and political vision that could transform scattered tribes into a coherent force. Their expansion southward toward the Timon River region brought them into direct contact with Jurchen communities that had accepted Goryeo protection, creating the friction that would eventually explode into open warfare. From Goryeo's perspective, the situation presented complex challenges that existing diplomatic frameworks seemed inadequate to address. Many Jurchen communities along the kingdom's northeastern frontier had voluntarily submitted to Korean authority, creating relationships that carried both benefits and obligations. These communities provided valuable intelligence about developments in Manchuria, while serving as a buffer against potential threats from the north. However, they also created responsibilities that might eventually require military intervention to fulfill. The kingdom's experience with frontier management had generally been successful through a combination of diplomatic integration and strategic restraint. Jurchen communities that accepted Korean authority were often granted autonomous status as tributary territories, allowing them to maintain traditional governance structures, while acknowledging Goryeo's ultimate sovereignty. This system had worked well when dealing with scattered tribes of roughly equal strength. But the emergence of a unified Jurchen confederation under aggressive leadership created entirely new strategic calculations. King Sukjong and his court, including Yun Gwan, were well aware of these developments and their potential implications. Intelligence reports from the frontier described the Wanyun expansion with growing concern, while tributary Jurchen communities sought reassurance about Korean protection in the face of increasing pressure from their consolidating cousins. The question was not whether these developments would eventually require Korean response, but rather what form that response should take and when it should begin. The crisis that would define Yun Gwan's career erupted suddenly in January 1104. When Wanyun forces pursuing rival Jurchen groups advanced beyond the Tamun River, to approach the gates of Jeonju, a Korean frontier fortress. This was not merely a border incident but a direct challenge to Korean authority that demanded immediate response. The symbolic significance was unmistakable. If Korean protected territories could be invaded with impunity, the entire frontier system would collapse, potentially encouraging further aggression. King Sukjong's appointment of Imgan as Northeast Regional Military Commander represented the kingdom's initial attempt to resolve the crisis through measured military pressure. Imgan was an experienced official with both administrative and military credentials, seemingly well qualified to manage a delicate situation that required both strategic thinking and tactical skill. His assignment reflected the court's hope that a show of force might deter further Jurchen expansion without escalating into major warfare. The disaster that followed revealed the inadequacy of conventional approaches to this unprecedented challenge. Imgan's decision to launch a preemptive attack, rather than waiting for favorable conditions or seeking diplomatic resolution, led to a devastating defeat that exposed Korean forces to humiliating retreat. The victorious Jurchen forces pursued their advantage by raiding Korean territory around Jeonju, demonstrating that military weakness invited further aggression rather than promoting stability. The appointment of Yun Gwan as Northeast Regional Military Commander in the wake of this debacle represented a fundamental shift in the kingdom's approach to the Jurchen challenge. Unlike Imgan, whose background was primarily administrative, Yun Gwan brought to the position a combination of strategic thinking, organizational skill, and political authority that might prove more effective against an unconventional enemy. His close relationship with King Sukjong also ensured that he would have the resources and flexibility necessary for innovative approaches. However, Yun Gwan's first encounter with Jurchen military capabilities proved equally disastrous. Despite his administrative brilliance and strategic sophistication, he lacked practical experience with the kind of mobile warfare that Jurchen cavalry forces had perfected through generations of tribal conflict. The defeat he suffered was both personally humiliating and strategically dangerous, as it demonstrated that even the kingdom's most capable officials were unprepared for this new kind of warfare. The aftermath of this defeat revealed both Yun Gwan's analytical abilities and his determination to learn from failure. His report to King Sukjong identifying the fundamental military mismatch between Korean infantry forces and Jurchen cavalry demonstrated clear understanding of the tactical problems that had produced such devastating results. More importantly, his proposals for addressing these weaknesses showed innovative thinking about military organization that would soon revolutionize Korean defensive capabilities. The creation of the Byeolmuban special military units represented one of the most ambitious military reforms in Korean history. This was not merely an expansion of existing forces but a complete reconceptualization of how the kingdom should organize its military resources to meet unprecedented challenges. The system that Yun Gwan designed included specialized cavalry units to match Jurchen mobility, infantry formations trained for coordinated operations, and even archer units recruited from civilian populations. Most remarkably, the Byeolmuban incorporated Buddhist monks as the hangmakors, reflecting Yun Gwan's understanding that effective military organization must utilize all available human resources regardless of traditional social categories. This innovation demonstrated both practical flexibility and ideological sophistication, as it required overcoming conventional assumptions about appropriate roles for religious communities while maintaining their spiritual identity. The scale of this military transformation was unprecedented in Korean history. The mobilization of virtually all able-bodied young men throughout the kingdom created a total war capability that reflected Yun Gwan's assessment of the existential threat posed by Jurchen expansion. This was not preparation for limited frontier warfare, but for a comprehensive campaign designed to eliminate the Jurchen threat permanently. King Sukjong's enthusiastic support for these reforms, including his personal inspection of archery training, demonstrated royal confidence in Yun Gwan's strategic vision, despite the earlier military failures. The king's death during the winter following these preparations represented a tragic interruption of what might have been an immediate test of the new military system, forcing a postponement that would last several years. The temporary peace that followed Sukjong's death, maintained through diplomatic exchanges between Goryeo and the Jurchen Confederation, provided time for both sides to prepare for what seemed like inevitable conflict. For Goryeo, this interval allowed continued military training and organizational refinement, while the Jurchen Confederation used the time to complete their unification process and expand their territorial control. The resumption of hostilities in 1107, under King Yejong's leadership, would finally test whether Yun Gwan's innovative military reforms could overcome the tactical advantages that had made Jurchen forces so formidable. His appointment as supreme commander for this renewed campaign reflected both his unique expertise in Jurchen warfare and the kingdom's commitment to achieving decisive victory, rather than accepting continued frontier instability. The massive scale of the planned expedition, involving approximately 170,000 troops this would be no limited frontier action, but a comprehensive campaign designed to establish Korean dominance over the entire region, while eliminating the threat of future Jurchen expansion. As Yun Gwan prepared for what would become known as his Great Jurchen Expedition, he could hardly have imagined that success would prove as dangerous as failure. The strategic brilliance that had earned him this supreme command would soon achieve victories beyond his most optimistic expectations. Yet those very victories would create new problems that his innovative mind had not anticipated. The scholar who had risen to power through intellectual excellence was about to discover that military genius, like political acumen, carried risks as well as rewards. The campaign that would establish his reputation as one of Korea's greatest military strategists would simultaneously create the conditions for his ultimate downfall. As the day quietly fades and stars begin to whisper above. Welcome back to Korean History Whispers. Tonight, we witness Yun Gwan's moment of supreme triumph, as he conquers territories and builds fortresses that would stand as monuments to Korean power. While his victories are celebrated in history, tonight you will sense the intoxicating allure of conquest that blinds even the wisest minds to approaching danger. The campaign that began in 1107 represented the culmination of years of preparation, strategic thinking, and institutional innovation. King Yejong's court had carefully analyzed the lessons of previous failures, while building upon the military reforms that Yun Gwan had designed during the previous reign. The decision to launch a comprehensive expedition against the Jurchen Confederation reflected not merely military ambition, but a calculated assessment that the growing threat required decisive action before it became unmanageable. When Vice Commander Oh Yenchong expressed hesitation about the expedition's prospects, Yun Gwan's forceful advocacy revealed both his confidence in the new military system and his understanding that half measures would no longer suffice. The Jurchen Confederation had used the years of peace to consolidate their control over Manchurian territories, while expanding their influence toward the Korean frontier. Diplomatic solutions had proven temporary at best, military deterrence had failed repeatedly, and the window for decisive action was rapidly closing. The force that Yun Gwan assembled represented the largest military expedition in Korean history to that point. The 170,000 troops under his command included not only the specialized units of the Byeolmuban system but also regular forces from throughout the kingdom, creating a combined arms force capable of sustained operations across vast territories. This was not merely an enlarged version of traditional Korean armies, but a fundamentally new kind of military organization, designed specifically for the challenges of Jurchen warfare. The strategic plan that Yun Gwan implemented demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both enemy capabilities and geographic realities. Rather than attempting a single massive assault that might allow Jurchen forces to concentrate their defense, he divided his army into 5 separate columns that would advance simultaneously along different routes. This approach maximized the Korean advantages in numbers and organization, while preventing the Jurchen Confederation from using their superior mobility to achieve local superiority. The initial phase of the campaign exceeded even Yun Gwan's optimistic expectations. The overwhelming superiority of Korean forces, combined with the element of surprise achieved through coordinated multi-existence advances, created a cascade of victories that shattered Jurchen resistance throughout the target region. Village after village fell to the advancing Korean columns, with many Jurchen communities surrendering without serious resistance when faced with such overwhelming force. The psychological impact of these early victories was as significant as their tactical results. Jurchen communities that had seemed unified under Wanyan leadership quickly fragmented when faced with the reality of Korean military superiority. The tribal confederation that had appeared so formidable during frontier skirmishes proved vulnerable to systematic pressure applied by disciplined forces operating according to coordinated plans. Even when Jurchen forces attempted organized resistance, the superiority of Korean military organization became apparent. The ambushes and hit-and-run tactics that had proven so effective against smaller Korean expeditions were inadequate against forces equipped with specialized cavalry units and supported by coordinated infantry formations. When General Cheek Jung-young and other Korean commanders demonstrated their tactical skills in critical engagements, they validated Yun Gwan's entire approach to military reform. The rapidity of Korean success was remarkable even by the standards of experienced military observers. Within 3 to 4 months of the campaign's initiation, Korean forces had destroyed approximately 135 Jurchen villages, captured over 5,000 prisoners, and killed an equivalent number of enemy combatants. These were not merely impressive statistics, but indicators of complete military dominance over a region that had previously seemed beyond Korean control. More significantly, the systematic construction of fortified positions throughout the conquered territory demonstrated Yun Gwan's understanding that temporary victory must be converted into permanent control. The 9 major fortresses that gave the campaign its historical name, Yeongju, Bakshu, Gilju, Hamju, Gongheongjin, Yuyu, Tantaejin, and Pyeongjin represented strategic control points that would prevent any resurgence of Jurchen power, while serving as bases for further expansion if necessary. The decision to relocate 69,000 Korean households to populate these newly conquered territories revealed the comprehensive nature of Yun Gwan's strategic vision. This was not merely military occupation but systematic colonization designed to create permanent Korean presence in regions that had previously been contested frontier zones. The scale of this population transfer was unprecedented in Korean history, reflecting both the kingdom's demographic resources and its commitment to maintaining control over the conquered territories. Yun Gwan's triumphant return to the capital in 1108 marked the pinnacle of his personal glory and political influence. King Yejong's elaborate reception celebrated not merely military victory but the successful implementation of a strategic vision that had transformed Korea's position in East Asian power relations. The Jurchen threat that had seemed so formidable just a few years earlier had been completely eliminated. While Korean control now extended further north than at any time since the kingdom's founding, the honors bestowed upon Yun Gwan reflected both royal gratitude and recognition of his unprecedented achievement. His appointment as chief minister with concurrent responsibility for personnel affairs and military coordination placed him at the apex of governmental authority. The creation of a special merit subject category, acknowledging his role in pacifying the frontier and expanding the territory, established him as one of the greatest figures in Korean military history. The grant of noble title as Count of Yeonjipyeong, along with substantial land holdings and tax exemptions, provided material recognition of his contributions while ensuring his family's prosperity for generations. These were not merely ceremonial honors, but practical acknowledgments that Yun Gwan had fundamentally altered the kingdom's strategic position through his innovative military leadership. Yet even as the capital celebrated and rewards accumulated, troubling reports began arriving from the newly conquered territories. The Jurchen Confederation had not been completely destroyed, but had regrouped in regions beyond Korean reach. More ominously, the Wanyan leadership had formed alliances with other Jurchen groups, while preparing systematic campaigns to reclaim their lost territories. The Korean garrisons scattered throughout the 9 fortresses found themselves increasingly isolated as Jurchen resistance intensified. The same geographic dispersion that had facilitated the original conquest now created vulnerabilities that determined enemies could exploit. Supply lines became targets for ambush. Communication between fortresses became unreliable, and the psychological advantages of the initial victory began to erode under constant pressure. By early 1108, even as Yun Gwan received royal honors in the capital, Korean forces were already experiencing significant difficulties maintaining their positions. The fortress at Unju may have been temporarily overrun, according to some sources, while all the Korean positions faced sustained siege pressure that tested their defensive capabilities. The confident reports of complete victory were beginning to look premature, as the reality of prolonged occupation became apparent. The strategic situation that Yun Gwan had created through his brilliant campaign was proving more complex than anticipated. Military conquest had been achieved with remarkable efficiency, but converting tactical victory into lasting strategic control required different skills and faced different challenges. The Jurchen Confederation had lost territory but retained organizational capacity, while Korean forces had gained strategic positions but struggled to maintain them against determined resistance. The correspondence arriving from frontier commanders painted an increasingly grim picture of Korean positions under sustained attack by numerically superior enemy forces operating in familiar territory. The tactical advantages that had made the original conquest possible were reversed in a defensive campaign where Korean forces faced the same problems of supply, communication, and local knowledge that had previously handicapped their enemies. King Yejong's decision to dispatch both Yun Gwan and Oyin Choyang back to the frontier reflected royal recognition that the situation required immediate attention from the most experienced commanders available. However, the fact that such intervention was necessary just months after the triumphant return suggested that the victory celebration had been premature. The growing chorus of voices within the court arguing for negotiated settlement, rather than continued military commitment, reflected changing assessments of both costs and benefits. The massive resources required to maintain 170,000 troops in hostile territory were straining the kingdom's finances, while the mounting casualties were undermining public support for what had initially appeared to be a glorious triumph. When Jurchen representatives proposed peace negotiations offering to restore the traditional tributary relationship in exchange for withdrawal from the 9 fortresses, they created an opportunity that many Korean officials found increasingly attractive. The prospect of achieving the original strategic objective, eliminating the Jurchen threat to Korean territory, without the enormous costs of permanent occupation offered a face, saving solution to an increasingly difficult situation. The man who had achieved perhaps the greatest military victory in Korean history was about to discover that Troy, and that the heights of glory were often followed by the depths of disgrace. The strategic brilliance that had made him indispensable was about to become the source of his downfall. As the day quietly fades and stars begin to whisper above. Welcome back to Korean History Whispers. Tonight, we witness the final chapter of Yun Gwan's extraordinary life. As the architect of Korea's greatest military victory, faces the crushing weight of ultimate failure. While his fall from grace is recorded in history, tonight you will feel the bitter irony of a brilliant mind undone by the very success that defined his legacy. The year 1109 brought a harsh awakening that shattered the illusions of permanent victory that had sustained Korean confidence since Yun Gwan's triumphant return. The reports filtering back from the 9 fortresses painted an increasingly desperate picture of Korean garrisons, under relentless siege by Jurchen forces, that had reorganized with startling effectiveness. What had appeared to be the complete destruction of Jurchen military capacity, now revealed itself as merely a temporary setback for a resilient enemy, fighting for survival on their ancestral lands. The strategic situation that had seemed so favorable just months earlier, was deteriorating with alarming speed. The scattered Korean fortresses, once symbols of triumphant expansion, had become isolated strongholds struggling to maintain communication with each other, while facing coordinated attacks from an enemy that knew every pathway, every water source, and every vulnerable approach in the vast wilderness of the northeast frontier. The Wanyun leadership had learned from their devastating defeat, and adapted their tactics accordingly. Rather than attempting to match Korean organizational advantages through direct confrontation, they had reverted to the guerrilla warfare methods that had originally made them formidable. Supply convoys became targets for ambush, messenger routes were compromised by constant surveillance, and the psychological pressure of isolation began to erode the morale of garrison troops, who had expected to serve in conquered territory, rather than besieged fortresses. More troubling still were the reports of coordination between various Jurchen groups, that had previously been fragmented or hostile to each other. The Korean invasion had inadvertently created a unifying threat that brought together tribal elements under the Wanyun banner, transforming what had been a confederation of convenience into a genuine national resistance movement, fighting for territorial recovery and cultural survival. The evidence suggests that Ungju Fortress, one of the most strategically important positions in the 9 fortresses system, may have fallen temporarily to Jurchen assault during this period. While official records minimized such setbacks, private sources like the burial inscription of Yitanji provide glimpses of military disasters that the court preferred not to acknowledge publicly. The psychological impact of any fortress loss would have been devastating to Korean morale, while providing enormous encouragement to Jurchen resistance efforts. King Yejong's decision to dispatch both Yun Gwan and Ou Chong back to the frontier represented tacit admission that the situation had deteriorated beyond the capacity of local commanders. The fact that the architect of the original victory needed to return personally to salvage his achievement suggested that the conquest had been less complete than initially claimed. For Yun Gwan personally, this represented a transition from triumphant conqueror to desperate troubleshooter, trying to preserve the remnants of his greatest accomplishment. Yet even the renewed presence of the kingdom's most experienced Jurchen commanders proved insufficient to reverse the deteriorating situation. The tactical problems that had been solved during the initial conquest, mobility, supply, and local knowledge, had emerged in different forms during the occupation phase. Korean forces that had excelled in offensive operations found themselves poorly adapted for defensive warfare against an enemy that could choose the time and place of every engagement. The mounting casualties and resource expenditure created increasing pressure within the Korean court for a negotiated settlement that would salvage some benefit for the ministers who had initially supported the expedition began questioning whether the strategic benefits justified the ongoing costs.
particularly when Jurchen negotiators offered what appeared to be face-saving compromises. The peace proposal that emerged from these pressures represented a fundamental reversal of Korean war aims. In exchange for withdrawal from the 9 fortresses, Jurchen leaders promised to resume the traditional tributary relationship while pledging to avoid future raids on Korean territory. From one perspective, this achieved the original strategic objective of eliminating the Jurchen threat to Korean security. From another perspective, it represented complete abandonment of territorial gains that had cost enormous sacrifices to achieve. The decision to accept this negotiated settlement in June 1109 marked one of the most controversial policy reversals in Korean history. The 9 fortresses that had represented the pinnacle of Korean military achievement were abandoned to the very enemies who had been so decisively defeated just 2 years earlier. The 69,000 Korean settlers who had been relocated to establish permanent presence in the conquered territories were forced to abandon their new homes and return to the kingdom's traditional boundaries. For Yun Gwan personally, this represented a transformation from national hero to scapegoat that was as swift as it was devastating. The minister who had been celebrated as the architect of Korea's greatest military triumph suddenly found himself blamed for a strategic disaster that had consumed enormous resources while achieving nothing lasting. The same innovative thinking that had made him indispensable during the conquest phase made him a convenient target for criticism during the withdrawal phase. The political dynamics that followed the negotiated settlement revealed the harsh realities of responsibility in dynastic politics. While King Yejong had enthusiastically supported the expedition and personally approved all major strategic decisions, the king's position remained secure while his chief minister faced mounting pressure for accountability. The court officials who had celebrated Yun Gwan's victories now distanced themselves from association with what increasingly appeared to be a costly failure. The stripping of Yun Gwan's merit-subject status represented more than personal humiliation. It was systematic erasure of his greatest achievement from the official record of royal service. The honors that had acknowledged his role in pacifying the frontier and expanding the territory were revoked as if the victories themselves had been invalidated by their ultimate abandonment. This was not merely punishment for failure, but denial that success had ever been achieved. King Yejong's attempts to protect his former favorite by offering him alternative positions demonstrated both personal loyalty and political limitations. The king could shield Yun Gwan from more severe punishment, but he could not restore the minister's political influence or public reputation. The offer of continued government service represented a form of exile in place, maintaining the appearance of royal favor, while acknowledging the reality of political irrelevance. Yun Gwan's refusal of these face-saving appointments reflected both personal dignity and realistic assessment of his changed circumstances. Accepting ceremonial positions would have acknowledged the legitimacy of his disgrace while providing no opportunity for redemption. His withdrawal from public life preserved what remained of his honor, while avoiding the humiliation of serving in reduced capacity after experiencing supreme authority. The broader implications of the Jurchen campaign's ultimate failure extended far beyond Yun Gwan's personal fate. The Korean withdrawal created a power vacuum in Manchuria that the resurgent Wanyan Confederation was quick to fill. The military experience gained through successful resistance to Korean occupation provided valuable preparation for the far more ambitious campaigns that would soon follow. The confidence derived from forcing Korean withdrawal encouraged dreams of expansion that would eventually threaten the entire East Asian order. In 1115, just 6 years after forcing Korean abandonment of the 9 fortresses, the Wanyan Confederation proclaimed the establishment of the Jin dynasty, with ambitions that extended far beyond their traditional territories. The elimination of the Liao dynasty and the conquest of northern Song territories represented achievements that dwarfed anything the Jurchen had accomplished during their conflicts with Korea. The tribal confederation that had seemed so vulnerable to Korean military superiority had transformed itself into the dominant power in East Asian politics. The irony was both profound and tragic. The Korean expedition that had been designed to eliminate the Jurchen threat had instead provided the experience, confidence, and organizational development that enabled Jurchen transformation into a regional hegemon. Yun Gwan's military genius had achieved tactical victories that facilitated strategic disaster, demonstrating how success in war could produce consequences opposite to those intended. The man who had once stood at the pinnacle of political power and military glory spent his final years in obscurity, watching as his former enemies achieved successes that made his own accomplishments seem insignificant by comparison. The strategic vision that had seemed so brilliant during the conquest phase revealed its limitations as the broader consequences of the campaign became apparent. When death claimed Yun Gwan in 1111, it marked the end of a career that embodied both the possibilities and limitations of individual genius in the face of historical forces beyond any single person's control. His posthumous honor of shrine enshrinement alongside King Yejong represented official recognition of his contributions. But it could not erase the tragedy of a brilliant mind undone by the unintended consequences of its own success. The scholar who had risen through intellectual achievement, the administrator who had managed complex governmental responsibilities, the strategist who had revolutionized military organization, and the commander who had achieved unprecedented victories, like these aspects of his remarkable career, were ultimately overshadowed by his inability to anticipate how triumph could transform enemies, rather than destroying them. Yet perhaps the deeper lesson of Yun Gwan's life lies not in the failure of his strategic vision, but in the demonstration of the forces that would reshape East Asian politics during the 12th century were too vast and complex for any individual to direct, regardless of their talent or determination. His legacy reminds us that the burden of historical responsibility often falls most heavily on those whose capabilities enable them to achieve great things. For they must bear not only the consequences of their failures, but also the unintended results of their successes. The man who had sought to secure his kingdom's northern frontier through decisive military action had inadvertently created the conditions for threats far greater than any he had originally faced. As the stars fade into the approaching dawn, we bid farewell to Yun Gwan, the brilliant strategist whose greatest triumph became his deepest tragedy, the loyal minister whose service to his kingdom created consequences he never intended, the military genius whose victories prepared the ground for defeats he would not live to see. Close your eyes and let these whispered memories carry you to peaceful sleep.